Hello, I'm Graham Jones and welcome to channel KT4, broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube. You can join in by sending in questions during the show. Just press the comments button on the screen. Don't forget to click the like or share buttons. If you're watching on YouTube, please click to subscribe to channel KT4. It's free. Please welcome into the studio Jess Mead, the project officer at the Southeast Rivers Trust and Wandle Trust. Hello, Jess, and welcome. And thanks very much for joining me today on channel KT4.
That's okay. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, Jess. Look, what a wonderful day it is today with all this beautiful sunshine. But I think we're going to be talking a little later where we probably need a little bit of rain. But in the meantime, could you tell me a little bit about the Hogs Mill, which is a chalk stream, one of only 200 in the entire world, I believe. Do tell me something.
Yep, so the Hogs Mill is your local river in Epsom and Ewell. It flows from kind of West Ewell all the way down to Kingston. And as you say, it's a chalk stream, which basically means that it's fed from the chalk North Downs aquifer. And it flows over chalk and through chalk as it makes its way downstream. And the thing that makes that really special is that there's only 200 of that type of river in the entire world. And the reason that chalk streams are just such a unique place is that water that's been filtered through the chalk is especially clear, clean, and it's a nice constant temperature because it's come from underground storage. So that means that the animals that are kind of adapted to live there are just really, really special, and they can only tolerate really nice pristine conditions. They're quite sensitive to things like pollution and disturbance, but that means that we end up with a really, really unique assemblage of different plants and animals in these chalk streams. And it can be things like classic species like salmon and brown trout, kingfishers, otters, white-clawed crayfish and water voles, as well as mayfly and things like that, are all kind of classic chalk stream species. And we're really lucky to have the Hogs Mill right on our doorstep.
Wow, you're giving such a great list of wildlife there, and I'm very fortunate to be very close to the Hogs Mill, and I sit there on a little pontoon, and I see a lot of these the wildlife and the animals that are there, which are absolutely gorgeous. Particularly dragonflies. There's such a variety of dragonflies. Actually, somebody said to me I should get a dragonfly book because there's so many varieties. But also we've got chub and barbel in the river where we are, and also just recently we found some graylings as well. So it seems to be that we're increasing the species at the moment within the river. But I think you're saying as well that the Hogs Mill is not as pristine as you would like it to be. So the question's got to be, what sort of problems does it face, and what are people doing about it, Jess, at this moment in time?
Yeah, so it's the Hogs Mill is an urban chalk stream, and with that comes all the kind of pressures of being around so many people, and it's lots of human activities do affect the river in different ways, things like pollution and physically modifying the river itself, and taking water out for us to use for drinking or washing and things like that all does have a direct impact on the river itself. So although we're really lucky to have this chalk stream right on our doorsteps, it does give us that special responsibility to make sure we're doing something about some of the problems that it has and make sure that we protect it.
Okay. No, I missed a little bit there about drinking water. How does that work?
So there's only so much water in the world, and a very small proportion of it is fresh water that's accessible for us to drink. And the water companies really love to take extract the water from the chalk aquifers because it's already very clean. So it's very easy for them to then make it suitable for drinking. So aquifers like the one that feeds the Hogs Mill get quite a lot of water taken out of them for us to drink and wash and do everything that we normally do on a day-to-day basis. But the more we take out, the less there is for wildlife. So sometimes that can really be seen in the river, the effects of that over abstraction.
Right. Just something I didn't know that at all. That's incredible. But there's also another bit of a problem because on occasion, on more than one occasion, sewage leaks into the river. So what's causing this, and why is it causing such problems for both the wildlife and people?
Yes, so unfortunately, this is a big problem for the Hogs Mill, and it's polluted with sewage on a quite a frequent basis, really. And that's basically because the sewage systems that we've built are not really designed to cope with the large population that we now have in the area. So when sewage goes into a river, it causes a massive drop in oxygen levels, as bacteria then work to try and break down all the nutrients in that sewage. And that can really cause a problem for fish and other animals that are obviously trying to breathe the oxygen that's in the water. It can cause huge die-offs of fish and other animals, which is obviously terrible for the river. And for us as well, we know the Hogs Mill is a really popular area for dog walkers. Dogs go paddling in there. Then kids are playing in the river, and having that sewage in the river is obviously a massive health risk for us, as you know, as well as being terrible for the wildlife. And really, there's two main ways that the sewage gets in there. The first one is pretty major, kind of sudden dumps of sewage, really, and they come from two storm tanks that we have located along the river. And the idea of those was, when they were built, was that the sewage treatment works couldn't cope with all of the sewage that we normally have, plus a heavy downpour of rain. So these tanks would store up the sewage until the rain had stopped, and then the treatment works had capacity to then treat that build-up. But now we find that with more and more people in the area, more pavements, more water running off into the sewage system, that these tanks fill up much quicker and end up overflowing into the Hogs Mill on a quite frequent basis.
Okay, I think we have a little bit of footage here of the Epsom storm tanks. Should we just show that? Yeah. Okay.
So all of that water that was pouring out there into the river was raw sewage mixed with rainwater. So all of that pollution is then heading right into the top of the Hogs Mill and affecting it, for quite a distance downstream. And that is unfortunately happening quite regularly throughout the year. And it used to be just that would happen in very, very extreme rainfall events. But now really any heavy downpour that we get, that could be happening at two locations along the Hogs Mill, which we don't think is right. And we are working really hard with other members of the Hogs Mill Catchment Partnership, including Thames Water, who own those storm tanks and are the ones that are ultimately responsible, to make sure that we are moving towards finding a solution to that, because we can't keep having that much sewage dumped into what should be a pristine chalk stream.
But I think we also have a second way which sewage enters the Hogs Mill, and that's through misconnected drainage. Can you tell me a little bit about that, Jess?
Yeah, so basically, in some areas we have two separate sewage systems. So one is for all the rain that falls onto roads and pavements and things like that and goes straight into the river, because that should be clean. And problems occur when people accidentally plumb in appliances like toilets or washing machines, showers, things like that into that drainage system, which then goes straight to the river. So the image you can see here is of an outfall at Sheep House Way on the Hogs Mill, and all that grey stuff growing on the front is something we call sewage fungus, which basically thrives in these high nutrient conditions when we have these misconnections. So these appliances that are discharging the pollution straight into the river instead of it going to get treated. And unfortunately, we get things like that grey sewage fungus, we get smelly, discoloured water, and also some unflushables. So things like wet wipes and sanitary towels that we're not meant to flush down the toilet then are also not getting filtered out, so they end up in the river as well, which is particularly nasty. To kind of try and improve this situation on the Hogs Mill, we worked really closely with our team of volunteers and the Environment Agency and Thames Water to do something called an outfall safari, where we basically surveyed the entire river, looking for these problemed outfalls, so that we can then report them to Thames Water and they can fix them. And we've seen a huge increase in the number of outfalls that have been fixed. And a lot of the ones that looked really nasty back in 2016 are actually greatly improved. So we're hoping to do the outfall safari again to kind of check up and make sure that there's been no slipping down of the standards in some places, because there's always a risk that more appliances have been plumbed in incorrectly. And if anyone from Thames Water ever gets in touch with you to say you've got a misconnection at your property, please do fix it as soon as you can, just because otherwise every time you're using that appliance, the pollution's going into the Hogs Mill.
Right. I've got the message, Jess. Right. As we speak, the river at today, at this moment in time, is rather low. Is that what's meant by low flows, Jess?
Yeah, so low flows are exactly what they say on the tin, really. There's not as much water in the river as there should be, and that's obviously going to have negative effects on animals and other, plants and things like that need the river, because there's less river there for them to live in. And also it means that any pollution going into the river is less diluted because there's less water there. And this is caused by the problem that I talked about earlier of us as users of water taking too much out. And basically it means that we're taking out more than it's being topped up every winter in the aquifer. So this over abstraction means that, there's less water for wildlife, basically. So the thing we need to all be really careful of at home is how much water we're using, and see it as a really precious resource, because there is only so much of it, and the more we use, the less there is for rivers.
Okay. Notice that as you said, the river is getting lower, and therefore there's less space for the river population. And when we get extreme temperatures like we're seeing at the moment, obviously that changes the temperature of the water that's flowing along the river. Does that have an impact in oxygen levels for fish?
Yes, sometimes we see, because the hotter the weather, the more quickly reactions are happening. So those bacteria that I mentioned that kind of clean up the river, that it's good to have some of them, but they can really take over. And when they are busy there using up all the oxygen, then it can cause dips. If there's pollution there and then there's high temperatures, then it can cause dips in oxygen, which are going to affect the wildlife.
Okay, I've noticed there are a number of weirs and barriers along the Hogs Mill. Why are they there, and what do they do, Jess?
So why are they there is a very good question. They're there for a lot of different reasons. So some of them are there just as leftovers from kind of more industrial past or industrial uses for the river. And some of them are still used. So the Environment Agency has all these measures and gauges that it uses to see how much water is in the river for flood risk purposes. So some of them are there to enable that function. Some of them are just left over. And some of them are things like the footings for bridges. So as the A240 and the A3 cross the Hogs Mill, there's barriers there to fish just from where the bridge was built. So they do cause quite a lot of problems because not only are they basically a big wall for fish to swim into, and it means they can't go up and down the river, they also affect the flow of water and the flow of sediment downstream, which basically stops all the natural processes that a river would normally have and really degrades the habitat value to the species that call it home. So in terms of fish migration, though, it's not just the kind of famous migratory fish like salmon and eels. It's all fish. So all fish need to move up and down the river for different times of their life, to do different activities, or in different seasons. So if we just kind of partition the river up into tiny little chunks with these barriers, it means that the fish have a much lower chance of being able to sustain a healthy population.
Okay, here's a picture. If you could let's have a look at this.
Right, okay, so that's where the Green Lane stream, which is a tributary of the Hogs Mill, comes into the Hogs Mill itself, and just above that, you can't really see it very well in the picture, is a little weir, and as part of some restoration, which I'll talk about in a bit, we removed that weir, and that's always our preference. So we've been working since 2012 to kind of make all of the barriers on the Hogs Mill passable to fish, and we've only got one left, so we're doing pretty well. And preferably what we'd always do is just completely remove the weir, so that there's it removes the barrier to the fish, and it also restores those natural processes that we really want to see in a river. But if that's not possible, then sometimes we do kind of have to think a bit more outside the box and do a bit more heavy engineering to make that barrier passable. So there's a lot of different things we can do. So at some places in Kingston, we've put almost like a little fish ladder on the front of the weir so that fish can make their way up a little bit at a time. Other times we use something called an eel pass, which is just some bristles at the side. And sometimes we create something called a rock ramp, which is quite a feat of engineering, really. It's basically our delivery team do lots of calculations and figure out how to make kind of step up the water a little bit at a time. So it basically forms this water feature, it looks like, which is rows of rocks, huge boulders that have been positioned to allow the fish to kind of get up a tiny bit at a time over this barrier. And there you'll see these rock ramps at different places along the Hogs Mill, especially places like just downstream of the A240 and A3, because there's no way we could have removed those barriers without completely demolishing the bridge and building a new one, which is obviously completely impractical. So yeah, we've had to think a bit outside the box at some places.
I think this video may give us an example of that. Let's have a look.
So yeah, that's one of our rock ramps. That one's at down in Kingston, near Berrylands, at the Hogs Mill Sewage Treatment Works, which was a really, really big project that took quite a lot of figuring out how we were going to overcome it, because it wasn't just one weir. There was 4 different barriers there to overcome. So we had to do one big project and fix them all at once, and that's one of the aspects of it, that rock ramp.
Okay, now it's making a bit of sense there. So, Jess, what's the theory behind artificially straightening rivers, and has this been done along the Hogs Mill? Now, I'm also going to say that one of your kind volunteers suggested that I looked at putting a bend in the river, and I was kind of a bit perplexed with what that meant. You know, it meant, do I get a very big pickaxe and start reshaping the river? But I know it's by using under the water, using bits of bramble and wood and various things like that. So let's stick with the straightening of the river at the moment before I get myself too deep into this.
So the Hogs Mill, like a lot of rivers that we used for industry, have been straightened, dug down, kind of changed over the years, had concrete banks put in and things like that. And some of the reason for that was because we thought that the quicker we got the water from A to B, so downstream, the less likely it was that places were going to flood, which seemed like a fine theory at the time, and a lot of work went into making those rivers as straight as possible and as fast flowing as possible. But now we know that actually the opposite is the case, and that by doing this we've actually increased and worsened flood risk in some areas. So at South East Rivers Trust, we do a lot of river restoration, trying to renaturalize and undo some of that work that was done back in kind of the 40s, 50s, 60s, that were all straightening it. We're now trying to re-wiggle the river, if you like.
Okay, now is this picture now the correct time to show it?
Yeah. So this is, as I said before, it's the confluence of the Green Lane stream, and as you can see, there's lots of concrete there on the banks. There's a weir, and basically that's not what the headwaters of a chalk stream should look like. And that weir is blocking passage to fish, and so there was a lot of problems here, and it was also much too wide for the volume of water that was flowing down there, which meant it was really, really shallow, and didn't have many kind of nice habitat features for wildlife. So we set about fixing that, and we basically took out all of those concrete banks. So it was hundreds of tons of concrete removed from the river. Yet you can see this is one of our delivery team's favourite bits of their job, when you get to do a bit of destruction before you fix it again. And this is basically kind of breaking a few eggs to make an omelette, because it looks a bit of a mess at this stage. But then a few years later, you just give it time to establish, and you can see this is much more what we'd expect at the top of a chalk stream. Kind of nice, clean gravels, lots of plant life, nicely gently sloping banks instead of all that concrete. So it just goes to show that if we take out some of the things that kind of people put in that caused a lot of problems for the river, then it can recover. We just need to kickstart all those natural processes that lets a river do what it does, basically.
Right. I've got it. And of course, this all works because you've got the most incredible team of volunteers who do some outstanding work here. So tell me something about this, Jess.
So this is our team of river restorers volunteers, and they helped us quite a few times along the Hogs Mill, actually, to do some channel narrowing and putting in a bit more variety into the flow of the river. And they've worked really, really hard on this project. So what they're doing here is basically putting a lot of brash, which is like all the twiggy bits of a tree, into the river and narrowing the channel. And they'll do that on alternating sides, so you end up with a nice meandering channel. And they worked really well together. We did a lot of work for just 1 week, and all our volunteers were involved right from the design of that right through to actually putting it in the river. And we're really pleased with how it's turned out. And we've been back since we put them in November, and we came back earlier this year, and they've got lots of silt in them, and that means that then lots of plants have been able to grow and establish in them. So give it a couple of years and it will just look like a normal, natural part of the bank. Mm-hmm. And they've done really, really well there. It looks great, but there's still lots of work that we can do to keep them busy.
I'm sure there is. They look like a really fun bunch of people. It is a great picture. I like this.
Yeah, they had a really good time, I hope, anyway. And it's nice to do this kind of project and then go back and see how it's settling in and see how it's developing over time. It's something that we spent a week doing it, but it's going to help the river for quite a long time into the future. And they've done a really good job. And if anyone else wants to come and volunteer with us, then go to the South East Rivers Trust website and have a look at what other things we've got going on.
Okay, what I'll do, Jess, after this program, some point this afternoon, I'll put the web pages up on the channel KT4 website and the Facebook page, so that people can use that as a reference point to go and find out a little bit more. Jess, before you go, do you have any other messages or views that you'd like to pass on to our viewers?
No, just that we're really lucky to have this really special river right on our doorstep. So anything that people can do, whether it's saving water at home or coming and volunteering out on the river with a lot of the organisations that are doing stuff in the area, then go ahead and do it, because it's really fun, and you're doing something to help this really rare habitat.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks for joining me today on Channel KT4. It's been fascinating hearing all about our chalk stream and all the great work you and your team, along with an army of volunteers, are doing to make the Hogs Mill even more pristine, especially for the abounding amount of wildlife that call the Hogs Mill their home. Thank you very much, Jess, for coming on board. Great to see you.
It's okay. Thank you very much for having me.
This is Graham Jones, broadcasting live on channel KT4. Join me next time. And until then, stay alert and stay safe.